Hello, everyone at Elisha Space. I absolutely love us commuting and getting back together again. And today, I am extremely happy to have Pastor Katy with us today. Pastor Katy is the pastor of Icon Church in Bonnie Lake, Washington. And she is just an amazing person. She has attended Liberty University with her major in church ministry and leadership and a minor in psychology. She's a phenomenal Bible teacher, counselor, worship leader, youth leader. I mean, she's kind of done it all with the combination she's had in, in both organizational or vocational and church ministry. She's kind of done it all, like most of us have when we're in church ministry. Today, we are going to be having this conversation around how the church has assisted and supported topics around mental health. It's going to be a kind of a serious conversation, but I feel like it's a very much needed conversation to have. So, Katy, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show today and having this very important conversation with Elisha Space audience today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity. This is something I'm passionate about, so I'm very excited for it.
Well, let's get right to it then, right?
hmm
Um, could you share what your perspective is on how the church has historically approached mental health issues, just overall?
yeah, I think, um, I think for me, I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. And even, I mean, that was only 30 years ago, which feels crazy to say. But
Right,
even
it
then,
really does, but go ahead.
I met a kid the other day who was like, yeah, I was born in 2004. I was like, oh, I hate that. Um, but that's where we are in life now. But even for me growing up, mental health wasn't really talked about in general in society at large. I feel like growing up, if you knew someone who went to see a therapist, it was like, oh my gosh, what happened in your life? Like that was a big deal. And I
hmm
think the church has largely treated mental health the same way. You even look down through church tradition, people who were had mental illnesses or things like that were kind of cast out of church society at large or thrown into asylums or whatever. There was no real care for them. And I don't feel like that care has really started in the church, and that the church has turned a lot of attention to mental health at large until maybe just the last 10 years or so, when that's really blown up.
Right, right. I Sadly, I agree with you. I was thinking about when you were talking about how, like, if someone has anxiety or depression, and we
Mm-hmm.
talked about this when we were discussing like ideas for the show, and sometimes it's an imbalance of a chemical imbalance. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, it's kind of like shunned, like, oh, you can't say that. Why can't you say that if that's your truth at that present moment?
Yeah.
Why can't you say that? So, how do you feel the churches has handled um, mental health, and how has it evolved over the past few decades? Do you think overall?
Yeah, I think now we're in this really interesting place with the church and mental health. I think especially with social media, where all this information is available at our fingertips. I almost feel like we've swung the other direction on the pendulum, right? Where now everything is, oh, I'm just anxious, or I'm just mentally unwell, or that kind of stuff. And so now it seems like the church is almost overcorrected, and they're starting to talk about these things
That's right.
without also speaking to, like, hey, there's a spiritual wellness that could be affecting some of these things, or even just a practical wellness too. I was talking with a friend the other day. When I grew up, my what my parents would do even when I was a young kid is if I had to make a dentist appointment, for example, they would sit next to me to answer all the questions about insurance and stuff like that. But I would call and I would say, "Hi, I'm Katie. I want to make a dentist cleaning appointment, whatever." And they gave me that learned skill. And so because of that, I'm confident I can walk into these spaces. But now we're seeing this group of kids, this generation, who's so tied to their cell phones, who has limited human interaction, who can do everything online. And to talk to a real person face to face, they go, "Oh, that makes me really anxious." And I'm like, okay, is that really anxiety, or is that just like a hard skill that you never learned how to do because you
That's a
grew
very
up in
good
this,
point.
And so I almost feel like, in a sense, like in a way, the church has come to a healthier place because we are actually starting to talk about this. It's okay for people to have anxiety, to have depression, to have all these different things. And in a way, I think we've almost overswung, and we need to address, like, hey, I don't think all of this is mental illness. I don't think all of this is unhealth. I think there are some things that are spiritual, that are practical, and kind of an amalgamation of all of the above. But I do think the church has become a much safer place for people struggling with mental health to be a lot more open about that, for sure.
Yeah, I do too. And I also think that two things can be true.
Mm,
Like I had someone ask me the question, is is someone who's has narcissistic tendencies, is that an individual who um also has some spiritual
mm,
things going on? Well, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not true.
mm,
It just depends on, because we're all unique individuals, right?
yeah.
And sometimes it has to do with um, you know, a trauma that we've had in the past. And so the way we process things and deal with things because of that trauma, it has led us to have more narcissistic type of tendencies.
Hmm.
And some of it is, which could still be a spiritual thing, but sometimes it's also, the spiritual side of things too, you
Yeah.
know. And trying to find that blend. I actually think that um and I'm not saying this because I'm in the field. I really am not. I'm also thinking too that because things are so complex, it's wise for um, a ministry to have some sort of a relationship with some sort of a counseling, or you know what I mean. There needs to
Yes.
be some sort of, because not everything is the same thing. God made us all very unique in the
Yeah.
way that we're, and no person, he is so creative when you think about it. He, no one person is the same. We're all
Hmm.
different. And think about all the people that God has created since the beginning of time.
Oh my gosh.
And no one is the same. Like we may
Yeah.
have similar tendencies, but we're not the same.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like we have to like even do it on a case by case basis and not
Hmm.
assume that it is the same for everyone else too.
Yeah. And like we talked, before we started recording, is like, for some people, they do have chemical imbalances, and it's a
Right.
very real, like, chemical thing in the brain. For other people, it might be a product of trauma. For other people, it could be this one specific situation happened to me. But other than that, like, and so it's like these are all such nuanced things. Like I always say, life is rarely lived in the black and white. Most of life is in the gray. Most of truth is in the, like,
Very true.
it's a
Right.
very nuanced thing for everyone.
What would you say are some misconceptions that church communities have regarding mental health? What do you think some of those might be?
Mm, that's a good one. Um, I think the biggest one that I kind of grew up being familiar with is that if you have any kind of mental illness or mental struggle, then you just don't have enough faith. Because if we believe that God is our healer, our restorer, all that kind of stuff, well, then like you should be able to pray, to ask God. And if you're not being healed from that, then there's clearly something wrong with you. And I'm like, okay, well, would you say that to someone who also has stage 4 cancer, who loves the Lord, who's praying for healing, and who isn't receiving that? Like, do they also not have enough faith? Because if you're going to put that there, you also have to put that here. And so I think that's one of just the biggest misconceptions in a lot of churches, is that if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or any number of things on that scale, that you just don't have a grounded, rooted faith in who God is. And I'm like, man, that's not what the Bible teaches. That's not who I know God to be. Like, Jesus grieved himself. And so I think if there's one really harmful teaching that's permeated the church around mental health, it's probably been that one.
Oh yeah, the statement overall of well, you just don't have enough faith. It's like a slam. You know what I
Oh,
mean? It's
oh,
like,
it's Oh, I remember one time, gosh, I think I was maybe 20 years old, 21, and I was fairly new to actually pursuing a life with Jesus. And I don't even remember what it was. I was struggling with something, and I went to a youth pastor, and I just said, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm having a really hard time. And I remember he looked at me and he goes, Katie, don't you believe that God is still on the throne? And I was like, well, of course I do, and you're my pastor, and so you're supposed to tell me how that applies. Like, it's not that I don't believe in God, it's just that I'm struggling with this and I don't know how to see where God is at in this situation. But like, those words from him were very damaging to me, but I feel like that's a lot of the time the response that the church has had to people who are really in crisis, really struggling. And words matter.
so what would you suggest to others
Mm.
on how they can speak life into those kinds of situations? You
Mm.
know.
Churches in particular, like
Mhm.
pastors and churches.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say number one, um, and this is kind of a roundabout way to get to where you asked, but I promise it'll connect. Number one, I think that pastors themselves have to go to therapy. They need that, and we as pastors hold so much. I mean, people are dumping stuff on us all the time, that I often don't know how to process. And I think as pastors get healthier, they're naturally going to know how to respond to these situations. Because I know that
Mhm.
I never thought that I was an anxious person until I started seeing a therapist. And she goes, wow, you seem to have a lot of anxiety. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And she's like, that's probably because you hear about other people's trauma and deepest, darkest secrets all the time. And so I feel like now, being in ministry, having just some basic tools of my own to understand my own brain, my own mental health, when I'm in situations with congregants or with people in public or whatever, it's a lot easier for me to go, oh man, it seems like there's something behind what this person said. Or even in a moment of conflict, if someone says something hurtful, I kind of have the ability to go, this doesn't seem like it's as much about me as maybe like a personal insecurity, or maybe I did hurt them and I can go, oh, I see how that was hurtful. And so I think the biggest thing is that like pastors, church staff, congregate, they have to get healthy. And I think as they do that, that's going to give them just a new insight into how to handle mental health well. So they don't say things like, well, don't you believe that God is on the throne, but that maybe they say things like, man, I'm really sorry. Let's pray that God would meet you in this place and maybe reveal how we can help you move forward from here. Those are two totally different responses, in acknowledging someone's mental health.
I also believe that there should be some sort of um, continual training
Mm,
on how to counsel congregants and how to work with congregants on different types of things.
yeah.
Um, I think that a lot of times, intentionally, but most of the time, I don't think it is intentional. And the intentional, I think, has to do with spiritual abuse, which would be another
Mm,
show. I think that it's I think that it's imperative to flow from a place of love.
Mm,
Because even in my profession, right, in a lot of ways, you hear like similar stories, or
mm,
you hear, and you can become numb to it
yeah,
because you hear it so much. And so it's kind of, but it might be a different scenario, but it's the same story, right?
yeah.
And so you kind of already know what to say. And then there can be some frustration that comes with that, where it's like, you just need to do this, this, and this.
Yeah, it becomes a fix it mentality instead of a how do I love this person right where they are for what they need in the moment.
And I think that's when it comes, that's where we have to like remove ourselves and show the love of God to that person.
Hmm. Yeah. And I like to circle back to what you said about continual training for churches. I think that's so key. I think there's this big mentality that especially we as lead pastors have, that we have to be everything to everyone. We have to know how to run the business in, we have to know how to preach, we have to know how to counsel, all this stuff. And like I think the cold hard reality of it is that like we as people weren't meant to handle that much responsibility. God created us as the body of Christ because we need each other. And so I think as pastors, like you were saying, and almost to prevent spiritual abuse in churches, we as pastors have to know our limitations. What I've been trained for is to teach people the Bible and do that well and to guide them spiritually. I'm not, I have a minor in psychology, right? But I mean, I took, a couple semesters of kind of basic classes, and so I might, yeah, be able to recognize more than the average person does because of that. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean I'm a trauma informed therapist. That doesn't mean I have all the right tools. And so I think part of that too is me as a pastor. If a congregant comes to me going, hey, like hearing your situation, here are the ways I'm equipped to help you. And I want to offer you that. Here's where what you need is kind of out of the bounds of my expertise. Can I connect you to someone and walk with you through that process in other ways while you see an actual professional? But I think so many pastors, try to take on the abused woman, the drug addict, or all of these different things. And it's like most of us are not equipped to do that in the way that like you are. And so I think pastors really have to start drawing a hard line and humbling themselves enough to go, the reality is I can't be all these things to all these people. And that's not me loving them well when I try to step into that either.
I also don't think it's scriptural because
Oh, yeah.
it's not scriptural because when you look at the way through scripture, um, it was a team.
Hmm.
It was never one person. It was never supposed to be one person. I think that overall, I think that's something, at least with the American church, we've taken on with it's made us similar to the world, and that's
Mm,
not something I think that God wants for us for His church. It's
yeah.
supposed to be a team, you know, and and within that team, um, everyone works together in conjunction and is accountable to one another within the team.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be one person. Like you have to have a lead, of course, but it's not
Hmm.
supposed to be one person. It is supposed to be a team. And with
Yeah.
that in mind, I think even having like something like a pastoral care,
Hmm.
you know, where people can have the access to those resources, or like I mentioned before, like I'm a part of a nonprofit. Well, not part of a nonprofit. I work with a nonprofit, and I see them who works with who work with um, you know young mothers that are that are going through um, transitions.
Mm,
Okay, and within this group home, you know, I talk with them maybe once or twice a month. I'm talking about the staff. I talk with them like maybe once or twice a month, and I talk with them about different ways to communicate with someone who is coming from a trauma, or if there's
mm,
an abuse situation, how to work with them alongside so that they can meet the goal, so they can become a better version of themselves, not just for themselves but also for their children or their child, you know. So I
Yeah.
kind of think that the church kind of needs that, especially if you're not a big church. You need something like that, so that that way you can, because sometimes we can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
You know.
Unfortunately. And that's where I've been really blessed is I actually have two therapists in my congregation. And there
Mm-hmm.
have been a couple times over the last couple of years where someone's come to me and I've just been like, hey, we have these people, they're great resources. And most of the time those two say, hey, we'll talk to this person for free for 3 months, just to get them back to a place. And I'm working with my therapist to come in and do a staff and a team training with our team and our elders for that reason of just like, hey, how can we have a baseline level of how to care for someone in crisis, care for these issues? How do we know when to step out? What's healthy for us to handle? And I just wish more churches would take those things more seriously and provide that kind of training, to their teams, because I think it would prevent a lot of harm.
Are there any specific biblical principles or scriptures that you find particularly relevant for understanding and addressing mental health?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, the Bible shows us so many different aspects of mental health, right? I mean, even if you just open the Psalms, on one page you have King David who's like, Lord God, you have blessed me. You own the cattle on 1,000 hills. And the next page over, he's like, why have you forsaken me so that my bones feel like dust?
Mm.
And it's like we're clearly seeing this spectrum in David. I think it's Elijah who's like underneath the tree and is like, God, take me now, I want to die. And God goes, hey, you need a nap and you need a snack. And then you even like, I'm like, I think that could solve a lot of the world's problems if we applied just that principle alone.
Right, right.
And then, you even have Jesus in John chapter 11. In the death of Lazarus, he's talking to Martha and he's talking to Mary, and he gives two very different responses to them. When Lazarus dies and Martha goes, Jesus, why didn't you come? Jesus says, hey, Martha, who do you know me to be? And she goes, I know that you are the resurrection and the life, and I know that I will see my brother again. And so there's clearly a place in a moment of grief where Jesus shows us sometimes we need to share the simple truth of like, hey, there's a hope beyond this that I don't think you're seeing. And then just a few verses later, Mary asks Jesus the same question of why did you not come and save my brother? And it says that Jesus sits down next to her and he weeps. And so we even see Jesus meeting these two different women in two very different ways in the same moment based on what he felt like they needed. And we see Jesus himself grieving death. And then you have, I mean, Romans chapter 12 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it gives us a whole list of ways of how we can actually renew the mind by hating evil, loving what is good, walking in wisdom, all these different things. And so, I mean, the Bible has so much to say about mental health, which is why I'm amazed that the church hasn't talked about this until recently.
I think it's an aha moment and an awakening for the church too.
Mm,
It's an
yeah.
aha moment and it's an awakening. Also too, the battlefield is in the mind,
Mm,
or in the soul
yeah.
composes our mind, our will, and our emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so our spirit is good. When you ask Jesus in your heart and you've done, I mean, we're good. But the hard part that is the soul, is the place of the soul, of
Yeah.
making sure that our mind, our will, and our emotions is in alignment with what is the transition that occurred when we asked Jesus in our heart. You know,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. Like that's discipleship. If you think
Mm-hmm.
about it, that's moving in that space of discipleship of, and that's why we have the Bible studies, and that's why we have, you know, um, the different programs we have at church and things of the different ministries that we have at church in order to help encourage. That's why we get together in fellowship, to encourage
Yeah.
one another in the community, and in through community, you know. So
Hmm.
I think it's extremely, extremely important, you know, um, to reference those verses and integrate that with that when it comes to mental health. And I'm not just saying that because of my career. I'm also saying that
Hmm.
because I see the impact of it.
Yeah. Well, and you know what's interesting too, I don't remember the reference off the top of my head, but when the Pharisees asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And he says,
Mm-hmm.
love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength, right? If you look at the original Greek and what Jesus is saying, those words are really interesting. And it takes all of them for us to have a really healthy, well-rounded view of mental health. Because when he talks about the heart, the word he uses actually means your deepest desires. So in your deepest desire, do you desire to honor God, to be obedient, to do all these things, or do you desire the things of evil, right? And then I don't remember the exact Greek word he uses for mind, but it translates to proper thinking. So
Mm-hmm.
he's saying, love the Lord your God with all of your desires. And then he says, love the Lord your God with proper thinking, because there's a way to think about God, there's a way to think about ourselves, there's a way to think about the world that is improper thinking. And so Jesus says, until we have that proper thinking, we're not going to see God, we're not going to see the world in the way that God intended. And we probably are going to struggle in our mental health because those things are all out of alignment from each other. And I just saw, like, you don't hear that translation talked about a lot, but I think that's so important that Jesus even says you have to think properly about these things.
We live in a fallen world, so it's not unrealistic to think that we're going to pick up things because we are in a fallen world. We're
Mm-hmm.
not in a place of perfection. We're not.
Yeah.
What message of hope can you offer to someone who might be listening and struggling to reconcile their mental health with their spiritual beliefs?
Oh my gosh. So I would say number one, God is not afraid of your honesty. My one of my favorite verses, I think it's Psalm 34:11, says, God is near to the brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many times we're afraid to be honest with God because we either think he doesn't care or that he can't handle it. When the Bible shows us quite the opposite, that God is not afraid of the vast array of human emotion, and that actually those things were made in his image. Like Jesus grieved. And so if you're grieving, if like Jesus was heartbroken, God is heartbroken, I think so often people are afraid of honesty, where God is sitting there with open arms and he says, all I've ever wanted from you is to tell me exactly how you feel and let me carry that for you. And so a message of hope is like, God sees you, God knows you. And I know that sounds so elementary, but I think if we can really get to the core of that and just go, man, my God that I believe in is big enough to handle this. And he's not afraid of it. He doesn't mind it. Hebrews even says you can come to my throne confidently. And so, like, I always like to imagine, like, when I'm upset, when I'm struggling, when I'm mad, that I'm literally like throwing open these big doors into God's throne room. And I just walk in, I'm like, God, I'm pissed. Or, what, hopefully I can say that on this
Yeah, you
podcast.
can say that. Yeah.
Okay. But I kind of have that image in my head of like, when I'm going to approach God, I throw open the doors of his throne room and approach him confidently because that's what God says that I'm allowed to do because he wants to hear that. And so my message of hope would truly be that like we have a God who is not afraid of all the things that you're feeling and who actually wants to meet you in that place, weep with you, encourage you, give you everything you need because he can handle it.
Right. And that's the biggest thing. One of the is that he can't handle it. And then one of the other stories that I absolutely love is the story of Hagar.
Mm.
And he says
Oh.
to her, now this is there's different pieces to the story of Hagar, but it when he says to her, when Abraham exiles her and Absalom, and she's in the desert, and he gives her a stream, like he gives her water,
Mm.
and in the desert, and he tells her, "I see you."
Mm.
And I think that's such a big thing, because so many people who are struggling with soul wounds,
Mm.
I don't think they feel seen,
Mm-mm.
you know. And so when you made that statement, that brought me to that, is that God
Mm.
sees you and he cares.
He cares so much. I mean, created you fearfully and wonderfully made. Like, we could go to all the seemingly cliche things, but it's like they're cliche for a reason. It's because people love to hear it. They need to hear it. It brings them hope. And I don't think we can lose sight of that.
And when you think about the age of the world and how
Mm.
many people have lived on this earth, and no one is the same.
Yeah.
We are fearfully and wonderfully made, all of us.
Yeah.
We are not a mistake. We are not, you know, a blip, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is we might think we are. He with intention brought us here at this specific time
Mm.
to
Yeah.
fulfill the purpose and call that we have in our own lives. you know
Yeah.
I just love him. He's amazing to me.
He really is. It's pretty crazy.
So if someone wants to get in contact with you, if someone wants to learn more about you, learn more about your church, how
Hmm.
can they reach out to you?
Yeah, the best way, iconchurch.org. It's EIKON. I know a lot of people think it's Acon Church. It's not the rapper, it's Icon Church. So they can go to iconchurch.org. We have our sermons there. They can see what we're all about. They can follow me on social media, Katy Payne Jolly. My last name is spelled weird, so maybe I can send it to you for the show notes or something like that.
Yep, I'll absolutely
Um,
have all this on the show notes too, audience, so you'll have it.
Yeah, but yeah, and then in the fall, I'm gonna launch my own podcast. It's gonna be called Sacred and Seen, where I'm gonna walk people through really tough aspects of theology that really seem to rub against our modern culture, and talk about, like, how do we reconcile all these really hard topics with modern life. And so I'm going to talk about, why can women be pastors, and why do we follow some parts of the Old Testament law and not others, and things like that. And I look forward to scheduling a time with you to have you as a guest on there as well. That'll be
I
fun,
love
but that'll
that.
launch sometime in the fall. So, yeah, but other than that, I'm a pretty simple individual. So if you follow my Instagram, you're just going to see posts of my husband and I hiking, and, you know, all our normal morning coffees and stuff like that. So I'm a pretty simple gal.
Well, if you're in the area, or do you guys stream your services for some people that aren't able to attend church?
We do stream right now. They're mostly streaming. We do have an Icon Church app that you can download, but soon those are going to be on Facebook, YouTube, and on our website as well within the next couple weeks.
Okay, so I'll make sure to have all that information on the show notes if you want to send me the app information.
Yeah.
Because some people are not able to travel, or they have problems with mobility, or not having a car, whatever the
Yeah.
reason is. So that way they can kind of tune in and listen to your services. If anything she said resonated with you, I highly suggest talking with her and getting to know her a little
Mm.
bit better. And if you're in the area, visit the church. Most definitely. You are welcome. You are seen and you are wanted, you know,
Absolutely.
and
And we're
you'll be.
45 minutes. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say we're only 45 minutes south of Seattle. We're only an hour from Mount Rainier, which people travel all over the world to see. So come check it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So visit the church. And audience, this concludes our episode of Elisha Space. I hope, I don't take lightly
Mm.
that the church overall has not been always a place where you can feel safe, or you can feel
Mm-hmm.
loved, or even your presence wanted. But this is true. You know, Jesus, Yeshua, that it doesn't change for Yeshua,
Mm.
you know. And so my hope when you're hearing this, that it's helping you heal from maybe some wound that maybe someone said as a slight, whether it be
Mm.
intentionally or not, or if you weren't loved or handled well. I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping that this will help you within your own healing journey.
Yeah.
But this I'll say about Jesus. He's amazing. He accepts you for who you are despite everything else.
Mm-hmm.
He loves you for who you are, all of you, your spirit, your soul, and your body. He loves all of you.
Mm-hmm.
He loves you despite your mistakes, and he loves you when you're at your best. He loves you when you are asleep, and he loves you when you're moving,
Mm-hmm.
when you're active throughout your day. He sees you when you're having those difficult conversations and your heart is broken after the result of that. He sees that. And he, although the church is not always that place or hasn't always been that place where you might feel like you're seen, he sees you.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage you to run to him despite everything else. And we'll have more conversations and things of that nature about what that can look like for you. The YouTube channel also has some things that are stated there as well as to what that can look like for you. And I encourage you to visit, Icon Church and see the things that Pastor Katy is talking about too. Because at the end of the day, it is all about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it is. He is your healer. He is your restorer. He
Yeah.
is your hope. So as we end this episode today, my hope is that you get some healing, take some jewels from this, and let this be a guide to you getting to a greater place of wholeness within your spirit and your soul, as well as your body. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for joining us at Elijah's Space. Have a great day, everyone.